So this afternoon in Ottawa, all eyes on question period. Would it be the economy or Iraq that the opposition chose to focus on? Things have changed on both fronts since the last time MPs met before the holidays. Here's where oil prices and the dollar were on December 12th, 312 days from the election. Here's where they are today, enough to force a delay in the budget. Still a long way to go before the election. And here was the Harper promise on no ground combat in Iraq, no accompanying Iraqi troops. And here's the reality today from the defense minister after 3 ground combat admissions in the past week. So what would Tom Mulcair choose to ask about first? Here's that key first exchange.
Last fall, the Prime Minister specifically said that Canadian forces would not be pinpointing targets on the ground. The Chief of Defence Staff agreed that that would be a, quote, semi-combat role and it wouldn't fit with a non-combat mission. Is the Minister of Defence now telling us that he disagrees with the Chief of Defence Staff and with his own Prime Minister? Or is he finally willing to admit that this is indeed a combat mission?
Does he ask if I agree with the Prime Minister? The Prime Minister says that if you shoot against Canadian armed forces, they will shoot back, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very proud of the work that they're doing.
Of course they have to defend themselves, but the real question is, why did the government put them in harm's way after promising Canadians they wouldn't be at the front? That's the real question.
All right, so tonight Andrew is in Vancouver, Chantal is in Montreal, Bruce is in Ottawa. What should we make of that? The choice of Iraq first, economy second. Andrew.
Well, I mean, first of all, we're sort of in a phony war stage with the economy because we don't yet know what the impact is going to be on the federal finances. We don't yet know what the point is going to be impact on the economy. There's only so many times you can ask, where's the budget until the budget shows up. Whereas on this Iraq mission, substantively, I don't think it's hugely significant. I don't think people would be hugely surprised to find that special ops forces in a very dangerous part of the world were engaged in firefights. The problem from the government standpoint was they did say pretty clearly that they wouldn't be, and they're caught in a pretty flat-out contradiction. That goes to questions of trust that they'll be anxious to exploit, and it's not surprising to see them do that.
And add that fact that Catherine Cullen reporting tonight that Canada is the only coalition country that's been engaged in a firefight, the only one of dozens that are involved in all this. Chantal, your take on it?
It was the right choice for the reasons that Andrew listed, and also for the fact that the NDP is spending its first opposition day asking for a fiscal update right away. So the issue is going to be explored again. The government, I thought, wasn't prepared enough. This is a mission that the Prime Minister has presented as something serious. Most Canadians take it seriously. There is quite a lot of grey in what has been happening out there. It could have been dissipated today, and it wasn't. And I thought the Minister of Defence sounded more like he was blustering than explaining.
Bruce?
Well, I actually saw it a little bit differently. I thought it was not a bad day all in all for the government. I thought that we saw more Dr. Jekyll and less Hyde in the persona of the government. And I think that's going to be their game plan, at least leading up to the part of this session when the Duffy trial is going to be very prominent. I think the government needs to know that it needs to tone down the arrogance, give more thoughtful, measured answers, and I thought the Defense Minister did that in answer to the questions that he was given. I also think that, well, there is no question that there's a substantive difference between what the government said we were going to be doing and what we appear to be doing now. I guess the big political question is, will Canadians see that as being completely unacceptable, whereas they thought what we were willing to undertake was acceptable? I think the difference is really one where we can look at it and say there was a misrepresentation originally, but it might look to most Canadians more like a white lie than a big lie.
Well, it does open up that question that Andrew raised, which is the trust factor. Watch this. This is a collection of some of the clips through question period today on any number of different topics, not just Iraq, economy included, and others. Watch the tone of this, the combined opposition, both New Democrats and Liberals. Watch this.
A government that doesn't tell the truth to Canadians.
Why did the government mislead Canadians? Why won't the Conservatives come clean with Canadians?
When will the Conservatives come clean with Canadians?
Stop playing with words.
He is choosing not to share that with Canadians.
Be straight with Canadians for once.
They're all picking on that kind of tone to underline their feeling about the government, and one assumes that is the tone they're going to take right through to the campaign, no matter what happens between now and the first day of the campaign. Chantal?
Well, it's not only what happens in the campaign. I believe by then the government will have put more in the window, but the government's decision to delay the budget today Peter Van Loan saying we're not going to have a decision on what happens to the mission in Iraq leaves them with no answer. And you know what happens in a vacuum. It doesn't really matter that there are answers or that it's not substantive. After a while, in that vacuum that the government is leaving, the opposition has a pretty free game on issues that are central to the next campaign. Today, the Minister of Finance said that he wasn't going to run a deficit. He wasn't going to have to go back on what he is already committed, and there would be no cutbacks. Well, if the government is so sure of all that, it begs the question, why not have a budget?
You know, for those who don't know, Peter Van Loan is the government House leader, and most Canadians don't know who the cabinet ministers are, with very few exceptions. But Andrew, your thought on this?
Well, it is, I think, a long-standing point of vulnerability for the government because they have been, on occasion, shall we say, economical with the truth, a number of issues. I think they do have them kind of dead to rights. I agree with Bruce, this isn't the largest issue in the world in terms of the definitional differences between, you know, painting a target versus providing strategic assistance, et cetera. But they were pretty clear on saying they would not be in combat's way. I think the defense minister may regret his kind of off-the-cuff remark today about how do you assist without accompanying, when the Prime Minister had himself said they will not be accompanying. So it's a point of vulnerability. They're going to be going after it. The other thing I noticed, if you're talking about themes, is somebody has told Tom Mulcair to say middle class in every sentence he utters. I think they were conscious that they didn't want to, that maybe they'd yielded that a little too much to the Liberals, and they're trying to take it back.
Bruce?
Well, I think the opposition parties are going to talk about trust for now because I don't think they know exactly what they should be talking about up until the time that the situation in the economy clarifies itself, or the Duffy trial begins, or both. And I guess if you ask me, what's the difference between the 30% that the Conservatives might have at the low end of the possible outcomes and the 38, 39, 40% that they might have at the high end? To me, that won't be affected by this question of trust. The number of people who trust this government is more or less a settled number, and the number of people who distrust or mistrust this government is also settled. So I don't really think it's a particularly effective issue for the opposition parties right now, and I think the government was more or less able to kind of brush it off in question period today.
All right. I want to talk about Stephen Harper for a moment. He wasn't in the House of Commons today for question period because he was in Alberta at the RCMP funeral. But he did make a speech in Ottawa yesterday to party faithful, and it was very much campaign speech. You can tell when he's in campaign mode. The glasses are off, the contacts are in, no tie, very relaxed. In yesterday's speech, at least by my count, he only mentioned oil, the falling price of oil, once. But he did, and he had a method to why he said it. Watch this.
Now, you know, with the falling oil prices, the government's fiscal flexibility has been reduced, without a doubt, at least for the short term. To some, that's a reason not to balance the budget. But to those people, there is always a reason not to balance the budget. That's how the small Trudeau deficits of the early 1970s became big deficits that went on for a quarter of a century. And it ended up with the Liberals hiking taxes and cutting our most cherished and essential social programs, healthcare and education, the biggest cuts any government has ever delivered to those programs.
Okay, I found that interesting because he managed to bring up Pierre Trudeau in there and address the sort of kind of Trudeau thing head on and hang the deficits on him. Kind of, you know, did a sweep of history for 30 years. It didn't mention the 9 years of the Mulroney government that kind of whipped up the deficit pretty good in those years too. But Andrew, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, Trudeau has benefited a great deal from heredity in various ways, and that cuts both ways. There are negative aspects to Pierre Trudeau's legacy, and whether it's fair or not to connect him to that, it's a pretty tempting target, I think, for anybody on the, the opposing side politically. I think it also helps to try to justify, at least in his own mind, or in the way he hopes the public's mind, the government's come hell or high water determination to balance this budget. You know, economically, if you ran a $3 billion deficit, it wouldn't make any difference whatever. But he's going to make the case, and you saw him there saying a little bit can become a lot, but we don't want to go down that road, so that's why we're so obsessed with delivering this balanced budget.
What do you make of it, Bruce?
Well, I watched all of that speech online yesterday, Peter, and I thought it was, relatively speaking, a pretty good delivery by the Prime Minister. It was cool, it was collected. It lacked passion and it lacked a certain amount of energy. And I think that if he campaigns like that, he may find himself being seen as the campaigner who has the least energy in the marketplace come this fall. That having been said, I don't think it's going to work for him to say, because Justin Trudeau's father ran up big deficits, you can't trust Justin Trudeau with the books of the country. I do think that confidence and competence are the things that the Prime Minister is trying to sell and are probably the things that it is best for him to try to sell heading into this election campaign. And that's what I think yesterday's speech was about.
Chantal?
It's counterintuitive, I think, in Ontario today to think that using Pierre Trudeau's name will drive votes away from the Liberals. It certainly worked in 1984. But today, the image that Ontarians have of Trudeau, and not only Ontarians, but a lot of Central Canadians, does not really, get votes away from the Liberals. It's probably the opposite. So I'm not sure where we're going with that. I also think that if the Liberals want to counter that, they only need to parade Paul Martin in a couple of rallies. Most voters in their lifetime remember Paul Martin getting rid of the deficit.
I've only got a minute left. I'm wondering whether there was anything else that you witnessed today that you think we should keep our eye on in terms of how this year is going to unfold through into the election. Bruce?
Well, just watching how the other leaders performed, I think it's clear that Mr. Trudeau is actually getting a little bit better in the House. But I think he knows that the House of Commons is not going to be where his fortunes are going to be made or broken. It's going to be on the campaign trail and in events outside the House of Commons, given his party situation. I think Mr. Mulcair knows he needs to use this session or this season of the House in a far more efficient fashion than he was able to in the last part of the last year.
Chantal?
I thought Thomas Mulcair looked more tired than I've seen him in the past and less energized. And I think he probably thinks, and so do his advisors, that he has done the best that he can do in the House of Commons, and he's not going to win the election there.
Andrew?
I can't say I saw anything today, but I'll just note in passing this remarkable confluence of events where neither party, neither the Conservatives nor the Liberals, seem to want to make climate change or what to do about it an issue anymore. We had the Prime Minister at the year end saying he didn't mind if we had pricing carbon if the provinces did it. Now Justin Trudeau in the last week saying he doesn't mind if the provinces take the lead as long as there's carbon pricing. Not a whole lot of difference between them anymore.
Well, it'll be interesting to see whether anybody picks up on that in terms of whether or not there is further debate on that issue. All right, thank you all. Andrew in Vancouver tonight, Chantal in Montreal, Bruce in Ottawa. A reminder that given tonight's special edition, no ad issue on Thursday this week.